Welcome to the Reality Revolution. This episode is the Song of the Universe, The Secrets of Silence. In the beginning, there was silence. Before the first word was spoken, before the first thought arose, silence existed as the primordial canvas upon which all of creation would be painted. This silence persists beneath every sound, behind every word, within every moment, not as an absence, but as a living presence that contains infinite potential. Understanding silence requires us to first recognize that not all silence is the same. There's the dead silence of disconnection, the uncomfortable void we rush to fill with noise. There's the pregnant silence of anticipation, the moment before dawn when the world holds its breath. There's the living silence of nature, alive with consciousness and unspoken wisdom. And there is the sacred silence of presence, where the boundary between observer and observed dissolves into pure awareness. The first silence we typically encounter is surface silence, the simple silence of audible sound. This is merely the doorway, the initial invitation to something far deeper. As we move beyond surface silence, we discover layers of subtler silence, each with its own quality and teaching. Physical silence emerges when we first step away from noise. This is the silence we find in a quiet room, in the early morning hours, or in remote natural settings. While essential as a starting point, this represents only the outermost layer of silence. Mental silence appears when the constant chatter of thoughts begins to quiet. This silence isn't about forcing thoughts to stop, but about discovering the space between thoughts. Like clouds passing through a vast sky, thoughts come and go while we rest in the silent awareness that contains them. Emotional silence develops as we learn to rest beneath the surface of turbulent feelings and reactions. This is the calm at the bottom of the ocean, undisturbed by the waves above. In emotional silence, we can observe our feelings without becoming entangled in them. Soul silence represents the deepest layer, where individual consciousness meets universal awareness. This is the silence of pure being, where all divisions dissolve and we recognize our fundamental unity. This is why it's important for you to unplug from your devices and get out in nature. It's why it's so important for all of you to stop thinking so much. The universe is always talking to you, but you've been trained to listen to other people and organizations, news outlets, and preachers. You've lost touch with the sound that the universe makes. You want to hear a voice in your head coming to you from an ascended master or an archangel, but that's only because you've been taught to value words over vibration, and sometimes even over the truth. I invite you to listen without expectation. Listen without having formulated a question. Listen to what the silence has to share with you, and know that you are the one orchestrating it all. You are the giver and the receiver. You are meant to feel this universe and hear this universe as much as you are to see it. If you really want to understand your connection to all beings in this universe, you need to slow down and listen long enough to hear the call, to hear how the universe is summoning you. Certainly there's a lot to be gained from being on the internet, connecting with other people in all the ways that we do with our devices, but we're always only getting a fraction of the story. And when you tune in and listen, when you open up to receive, that is when you can feel the harmony of your song with the song of the universe. When we enter deep silence, we discover it has its own intelligence. It begins to work on us in subtle ways, dissolving tensions, clearing mental debris, and attenuating our perception to ever finer levels of awareness. This is why traditional wisdom traditions have always emphasized silence as a primary path to awakening. Most people understand silence as an absence, a void where sound used to be, an empty space between words, a pause between thoughts. But true silence is not an absence at all. It is a living presence, a field of pure potential, the very substance from which the universe weaves its endless symphony. Think of the moment just before dawn when the world holds its breath in anticipation. This is not empty silence, but pregnant silence, alive with possibility, rich with unspoken wisdom. It's the same quality of silence you might find deep in a forest, when even amidst the subtle sounds of nature there exists a profound stillness that speaks directly to your soul. This is a living silence, a presence so tangible you can almost reach out and touch it. The universe speaks most eloquently through silence, through stillness. It's in those moments of pure silence that the deepest truths reveal themselves, not as thoughts or words, but as direct knowing, like the space between heartbeats. This silence contains all the wisdom of existence in an endless depth. It doesn't need to announce itself or compete for your attention. It simply is, and in its being, it communicates everything that needs to be known. When you begin to recognize silence as a presence rather than an absence, your entire relationship with it transforms. No longer is it something to fill or overcome, but something to sink into, to commune with, to learn from. This is the silence that mystics have spoken of throughout the ages. Not the mere absence of sound, but the living presence of universal consciousness itself. Consider the difference between empty silence and pregnant silence. Empty silence is what you might experience in an anechoic chamber, a dead silence that feels devoid of life or meaning. Pregnant silence, on the other hand, is the silence you might experience watching a sunset, holding a sleeping child, or standing beneath a vast starlit sky. This silence is full of meaning, rich with communication, alive with presence. The universe doesn't need words to convey its wisdom. In fact, words often get in the way, creating static that drowns out the more subtle frequencies of universal communication. When you learn to recognize and attune to the silence, you discover that the universe is constantly broadcasting wisdom through the medium of stillness itself. This living silence exists not just in moments of obvious quiet, but within and beneath every moment of your existence. Its presence in the space between your thoughts, in the pause between your breaths, in the gap between stimulus and response. Like the blank canvas that makes a painting possible, or the space that allows music to exist, this silence is the fundamental ground of all experience. You might notice this silence first in obvious places, in nature, in meditation, in the pre-dawn hours. But as your sensitivity to it grows, you begin to perceive it everywhere. It's present even in the midst of noise, even in the heart of a busy city, even in the middle of a conversation. This silence is not dependent on external conditions because it is not external at all. It is the very essence of existence itself. The song of the universe. The universe speaks through stillness in a language more fundamental than words. This communication happens not through the transfer of information, but through direct resonance, like two tuning forks vibrating at the same frequency. When you align with the silence, you naturally attune to universal wisdom. No translation is necessary because at the level of silence, you and the universe are not separate. In this silence, you discover that you don't need to seek wisdom from ascended masters or angels. You don't need to strain to hear special messages or divine guidance. The wisdom is already present in the silence itself, waiting only for your recognition. It's like suddenly realizing that what you thought was a blank canvas is actually a masterpiece painted in invisible ink, revealing itself only to those who know how to look. This silence is your birthright, your natural state. It's not something you need to achieve or create, but something you need to remember how to recognize. Like learning how to see those hidden 3D images that emerge from seemingly random patterns. Once you understand how to perceive this living silence, you find it everywhere. The journey into true silence begins with letting go of your preconceptions about what silence is. It requires moving beyond the idea of silence as mere soundlessness into an understanding of silence as the living presence of universal consciousness. This is not a journey of distance, but of depth, not of acquiring, but of uncovering, not of learning, but of remembering. Let yourself sink beneath the words I speak into the silence that holds them. Let yourself feel this presence that exists between the lines, for it's here, in this living silence, that the real teaching takes place. Not through transmission of information, but through direct communion with the silent wisdom that underlies all existence. In the space between your thoughts, in the pause between your breaths, there exists a silence so profound it speaks louder than words. This is not the silence of an empty room or a muted television. It is the living silence. Can you hear it? The truth is, we become a society of noise addicts. Every moment of potential silence is filled with podcast, music, television, or the endless scroll of social media. This isn't merely a habit. It's a collective avoidance of something we've grown deeply uncomfortable with. The sound of our own being. The song of the universe itself. Our addiction to external voices runs deeper than mere distraction. We've been conditioned since childhood to seek answers outside ourselves. From religious authorities to social media influencers, from spiritual teachers to channeled entities, we constantly look to others to tell us what is true, what is real, what is meaningful. This dependence on external validation has created a kind of spiritual tinnitus, a constant ringing that drowns out the subtle frequencies of universal wisdom. Technology has become both our connection to the world and our barrier from it. Our devices promise to keep us connected, informed, and entertained. Yet each notification, each alert, each message creates a ripple in the silent waters of consciousness. Like waves on a lake, these constant disturbances make it impossible to see clearly into the depths below. We become so accustomed to this technological interference that we mistake it for connection, failing to recognize how it separates us from deeper communion with universal intelligence. The irony of our modern spiritual seeking is that in our desperate search for guidance, we often create the very barriers that prevent us from hearing it. We want voices, clear, distinct messages that we can understand with our minds. We seek channeled wisdom, prophetic visions, or dramatic spiritual experiences, but in this seeking for voices, we missed the most subtle, most profound communication that happens through vibration, through resonance, through the silent language of being yourself. Why do you seek voices instead of vibration? Because voices feel safer, more comfortable, more easily understood by our thinking minds. Voices give us something to grab onto, to analyze, to compare with other voices. Vibration, on the other hand, requires us to move beyond the mind's need for definition and control. It asks us to feel rather than think, to resonate rather than understand, to be rather than to know. The greatest barrier to hearing the universe's wisdom is not external noise, but internal chatter. The constant stream of thoughts, judgments, memories, and projections creates a mental static that drowns out the subtle frequencies of universal communication. This mental noise is so constant, so familiar, that we've mistaken it for our natural state. Like fish unaware of water, we swim in an ocean of mental chatter, unable to recognize the profound silence that lies beneath. Our thinking has become compulsive, automatic, and largely unconscious. We think not because we choose to, but because we don't know how to stop. This constant mental activity creates a filter through which we experience reality, through which we create our reality, a lens that distorts our perception of what it is. It's like trying to see stars through a fog. The light is there, but our vision is obscured. The trap of constant thinking manifests in our spiritual journey as an endless search for more knowledge, more understanding, more insight. We collect teachings like souvenirs, accumulate practices like tools, gather wisdom like wealth. But true wisdom, the kind that comes through silence, requires not accumulation but emptying, not understanding but direct experience. Remember, the universe's song is not something you need to seek or strive to hear. It's already playing, constantly broadcasting on frequencies your being naturally knows how to receive. The work is not in learning to hear, but in removing the barriers that prevent you from hearing what has always been there. When you see pictures of monks just sitting in the temple all day long, they're just listening to the universe's song. That's all they're doing. In the rustling of leaves, the flow of water, the whisper of wind, nature will offer us a direct pathway back to this universal wisdom. Unlike human environments filled with demands and distractions, natural spaces hold a different quality of silence, one that effortlessly draws us into a deeper communion with the universe. The seeking mind, constantly grasping for answers and understanding, naturally quiets in the nature's presence. There's something about standing beneath ancient trees or gazing at distant horizons that puts our human concerns into perspective. The mental chatter that usually fills our consciousness begins to settle, like sediments in still water. Settling happens not through effort or technique, but through simple presence with nature's own silence. The art of listening without question marks a fundamental shift in how you approach universal wisdom. Instead of coming to silence with your list of concerns, your spiritual questions, your need for guidance, you learn to listen with no agenda at all. That's the only way that you can hear the song of the universe. This expectation-free silence opens you to receive what the universe is actually communicating rather than what you think you need to hear. Moving beyond the need for answers is perhaps the greatest challenge in developing this receptive silence. Your mind is trained to seek solutions, to solve problems, to find answers, but universal wisdom often communicates in ways that transcend your questions entirely. Sometimes the greatest insights come not as answers to your questions, but as dissolutions of the questions themselves. Preconceptions act like filters that color and distort universal messages. When you approach silence expecting to hear voices, see visions, or receive specific types of guidance, you actually block your reception of what's being offered. It's like tuning a radio to one frequency while the broadcast you need to hear is playing on another. Understanding universal frequencies requires moving beyond your fixation with words and voices. The universe communicates primarily through vibration, subtle frequencies that you feel rather than hear. These frequencies carry information more complete and profound than any words would convey. When we learn to attune to these vibrations, we access wisdom that transcends mental understanding. We've been taught to seek wisdom from masters, teachers, and guides. While these sources can be valuable, they're not necessary for direct communication with universal wisdom. The universe itself is the ultimate teacher, and its lessons come through direct vibrational transmissions rather than through words or concepts. Feeling truth rather than hearing it marks a shift from intellectual understanding to embodied knowing. When truth comes through vibration, it resonates with your entire being. There's no need for mental verification or external validation. The knowing is complete, immediate, and undeniable. The silent knowing develops through practice and trust. And as you spend more time in receptive silence, you strengthen your ability to recognize and trust these direct transmissions of wisdom. Like developing any new sense, it requires patience and consistent exposure to these subtle frequencies. The key to this journey is remembering that we're not learning something new, but remembering something ancient. Our being already knows how to receive universal wisdom directly. We're simply clearing away the barriers mental noise, technological distractions, seeking habits that prevent us from recognizing what we already know. Through nature's doorway and the art of silent reception, you discover an innate capacity for direct communion with universal intelligence. This communion doesn't require special abilities or extensive training. It simply asks you to be present, to listen without expectation, and to trust the wisdom that comes through silence itself. Sacred silence doesn't require a meditation hall or a mountaintop retreat. It can be cultivated in the corner of your bedroom, beneath a favorite tree, or even in your parked car between appointments. What makes a sacred space is not its location, but the quality of presence that you bring to it. The universe speaks just as clearly through the silence of your kitchen at dawn as it does through the silence of a cathedral. Creating spaces for silent communion begins with understanding that sacred space is as much internal as external. While it helps to have a physical location dedicated to silence, the real sanctuary is the one you create within your own consciousness. This inner sanctuary becomes portable, accessible in any moment, regardless of external circumstances. It doesn't matter where you're at, in the middle of a desert, in a prison, in a forest, at a resort. Sacred space emerges when you designate an area, however small, where silence is honored as a presence rather than filled as a void. This might be a corner with a comfortable cushion, a chair by a window, or a spot in your garden. It doesn't matter. The daily practice of deepening silence doesn't need to be complex or time-consuming. What matters is not the duration, but the quality of attention you bring to these moments. Begin with small pockets of intentional silence. Start with 5 minutes. Just get the timer out and then play for 5 minutes in the morning before checking your phone, or a few moments of conscious breathing before sleep. These brief encounters with silence, when practiced regularly, create pathways through which universal wisdom can flow more easily. Meditation in this context isn't about achieving any particular state or having any specific experience. It's simply about creating space for silence to reveal itself. Traditional meditation techniques can be helpful, but they should serve as doorways into silence rather than ends in themselves. Building a relationship with silence is like developing any deep friendship. The journey from thinking to being represents one of the most profound shifts in your development. It's not about stopping thoughts, which is impossible and unnecessary, but about changing your relationship with your mental activity. Instead of living in your thoughts, you learn to live in the awareness that contains them. Moving beyond mental activity doesn't mean becoming mentally inactive. It means recognizing thought as just one mode of knowing, and often not the most important one. Like waves on the ocean, thoughts can confirm their movement while we rest in the depths below. This is where we discover the art of pure presence. Pure presence emerges naturally when you stop trying to make anything happen. It's not a state to achieve, but your natural condition when you release the habit of constant doing. In pure presence, you're not trying to be spiritual, not trying to be silent, not trying to receive wisdom. You're simply being what you already are. The paradox of spiritual seeking is that it often becomes the very obstacle to finding what you seek. You look for enlightenment, for wisdom, for connection, not realizing that these qualities are inherent in your being. The practice becomes one of letting go rather than acquiring, letting go of seeking itself. Letting go of spiritual seeking doesn't mean abandoning the journey. Rather, it means recognizing that what you're looking for isn't somewhere else. It's right here, in this moment, in this silence, in this breath. The search ends not because we found what we're looking for, but because we realize we never lost it. Truth reveals itself most clearly in stillness, not the enforced stillness of trying to be still, but the natural stillness that emerges when you stop running after experiences. This stillness is always present, like the deep ocean beneath turbulent waves. Your practice is simply to remember it's there and to sink into it whenever you can. Finding truth in stillness happens not through effort, but through recognition. It's like suddenly noticing the background noise that's been there all along, except in this case, it's background silence, background truth, background being. This recognition might come in glimpses at first, but these glimpses point the way to what's always present. The shift from thinking to being unfolds naturally as you develop trust in silence itself. You begin to recognize your deepest knowing doesn't come through thought, but through direct perception. It's like learning to swim. Once you understand how to rest in being, it becomes more natural than the constant activity of thinking. In this state of being, universal wisdom flows naturally. You don't need to seek it or strain to hear it because you're no longer creating the interference that blocked it. You become like clear windows through which light naturally shines, like still ponds that naturally reflect the sky. This is the profound simplicity the universe has been inviting us into all along. Not a journey of becoming something different, but a return to what we already are. Not a path of accumulating more knowledge, but a process of remembering what we've always known. Not a practice of creating silence, but a recognition that the silence has always been there. Universal communion isn't reserved for meditation or sacred spaces. It's available in every moment, every breath, every heartbeat. I'm not saying you have to sit in meditation. The universe never stops broadcasting its wisdom, and your task is simply to maintain your receptivity amidst the flow of daily life. This isn't about escaping the world, but about discovering the silence that exists within it. Walking down a busy street, washing dishes, sitting in traffic, each moment contains an invitation to hear the universe singing through the fabric of ordinary experience. The wisdom doesn't always come as profound insight or dramatic revelation. Sometimes it's as simple as a knowing when to slow down, when to speak, when to wait, when to act. It's a living guidance. It's immediate and practical, emerging from your direct communion with universal intelligence. For busy lives, integration doesn't mean adding more spiritual practice to an already full schedule. It means finding the silence within the activities you're already doing. Living from silent wisdom means allowing your actions to emerge from a place of deep listening rather than habitual thinking. Decisions flow not from mental analysis alone, but from a deeper knowing. Relationships transform as you learn to listen, not just to words, but to the silence between them. Work becomes more effective as you act from intuitive guidance rather than just strategic planning. The greatest spiritual teachings point us toward direct experience rather than stepping out of the way. Like a finger pointing to the moon, they serve their purpose only when they lead us to our own communion with truth. Even in this episode, with all the words about silence, they can only serve as a signpost toward your own direct experience. The limitation of spiritual teachings lies not in its content, but in its tendency to mistake the map for the territory. We collect teachings, accumulate practices, gather knowledge, all the while missing the simple truth that's already here in the silence of our own being. No teaching, no matter how profound, can replace your direct experience of universal wisdom. Finding your own silent communion means discovering how the universe speaks uniquely through you. Some may feel it as bodily sensations, others as intuitive knowing, others as wordless understanding that precedes thought. There's no need to make your experience conform to anyone else's description. Your communion with the universe is as unique as your fingerprint. Being guided by universal silence requires a trust in this experience. This trust builds gradually as you verify the wisdom of silence in your life. You begin to notice how following the silent guidance leads to more harmonious outcomes than following mental calculations alone. You discover that the universe's wisdom is more practical, more immediate, and more reliable than any secondhand teaching. The beauty of living in universal communion is that it simplifies everything. You no longer need to memorize spiritual teachings or follow complex practices. The wisdom you need for any situation emerges naturally from your communion with silence. It's like having an inner GPS that always knows the way, not because it's been programmed with maps, but because it's in constant communication with the whole. This doesn't mean life becomes perfect or that challenges disappear. It just means that you develop a different relationship with your life's ups and downs. You begin to recognize that even difficulties contain wisdom when approached with silent listening. Every experience becomes part of a continuous conversation between you and the universe. In this state of ongoing communion, you discover that you've never been separate from universal wisdom. The sense of separation was itself an illusion created by your habit of looking outside yourself for what was always within. The journey of awakening is really a journey of remembering how to hear the silence that's always speaking, remembering how to trust the wisdom that's always present. As this remembrance deepens, life itself becomes your teacher. Every moment brings a fresh invitation to listen more deeply, to trust more fully, to surrender more completely to the wisdom that flows through silence. You find yourself becoming more authentic, more spontaneous, more aligned with the natural flow of life. The paradox is that as you deepen into this universal communion, you become both more uniquely yourself and more universally connected. Silence doesn't erase you individually, but reveals your true nature, an expression of universal consciousness. Your unique way of being becomes a note in the universal symphony, neither more nor less important than any other, but essential to the whole. This is the art of living in universal communion and listening to the song of the universe, being fully human while remaining anchored in silence, engaging with the world while attuning to the universal wisdom, speaking when needed while never forgetting the silence from which all true words emerge. This journey of remembering your natural state is not a journey of distance, but of recognition. We haven't traveled anywhere. We've simply cleared away the debris that obscured your view. Like waves settling in a pond, our mental activity has gradually stilled enough to reveal the depths that were always there. This natural state, this intimate communion with universal wisdom through silence, is not an achievement but a birthright. The profound simplicity of this truth can be startling. Silence is always available. It's here now. As you hear these words, it's there in the space between your thoughts, in the pause between your breaths, in the quiet moment between activities, even in the middle of a song. The silence is not dependent on external conditions. The universe is calling you not through dramatic signs or mysterious voices, but through the simple, profound silence that underlies all existence. It calls you to remember your natural state of communion, to trust the wisdom that flows through silence, to live from this deep knowing rather than from surface noise. You are invited to continue this journey of remembrance, to deepen your relationship with the silence, to trust more fully in the wisdom it contains, not because you need to become something different, but because this is who you already are. Stop, listen, remember. The silence that holds these words is the same silence that holds all of existence. I'm going to leave 2 minutes of just music here, but I want you to begin the process of going into the silence. And once you've done that, after this episode, turn all devices off and just sit in the silence, even for a minute, and watch what happens. This is your home, the eternal silence within, the song of the universe. Now let us go into the silence. You can find all episodes of The Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.